Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at UNC Pembroke. Today's guest is Denny O'Neil, a legendary figure in the world of comic books. As a writer, he was tasked with updating Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman. As an editor, he guided Daredevil's most celebrated run, and Batman's world from the 1980s to the new millennium. He currently sits on the board of directors for the Hero Initiative. Welcome, Denny.
Hi. Hello from across the country.
Well, let's start at the beginning. How did you get started in comics?
By accident. I had a job as a reporter on a small daily paper in southeast Missouri, and one of my jobs was to fill the children's page. During the summer, that was hard to do because there were no school activities to write about. And I was new in town, and I was kind of lonely, and therefore spending a lot of time looking at magazine racks and wandering around. And it suddenly dawned on me, I'm seeing comic books again. They'd been a big part of my life until I was about 12, and then they just stopped existing for me. So I dug into it a little bit, and my hunch was right. There was a big comic book revival going on. So I wrote a couple of stories about that, and then Roy Thomas got in touch with me. His parents subscribed to the paper. He was an English teacher at the time, but was the co-editor of what was unquestionably the best fanzine. I didn't know there were such things as fanzines, but there were, and he had a good one. And as a result of that, he had been offered a job working in New York for Mort Weisinger. He had about a month before he had to leave, so we hung out a bit on my day off, and then he went away. And I managed to make enemies of the police department and the fire department by pulling a prank that was very the people I am absolutely dependent on to do my job, I alienate. So my journalism career was kind of rocky, and then Roy sent me, ended up with Stan Lee. He worked for Mort just a couple of weeks, and then he was hired away by Stan Lee. Stan was looking to expand. He had a writer's test, which consisted of 4 pages of Jack Kirby artwork with no copy. So my mission, should I choose to do it, was to add words to these pictures. Well, who wouldn't do that? I mean, why not? Probably did it in 20 minutes and sent it off. And a week later, I was in the office late. I covered a story and got back to the office after it was closed. And was Roy, he was offering me a job with Stan Lee. So I did one of the rattiest things I've ever done. I left that night. Another journalist, a friend, packed my car for me. I wrote a note to my editor, and at 10 o'clock at night, started driving east. So my editor, who I was a decent guy, got to work the next morning and was short a reporter. I really regret doing that to him. Anyway, I hit New York and took a job as Stan Lee's second assistant, and discovered I thought maybe I'd do this for a year. And then I would get back to the real world, because, you know, Manhattan is not the real world. But things happened. I got married. I had a kid. I had responsibilities. And I seemed to have an aptitude for the comic book stuff. I also did some magazine work and wrote some short stories. But the comics seemed to be what I kept coming back to. That was my baseline. And we took off from there. I went to work for Dick Giordano shortly thereafter, when he, at Charlton Comics, little outfit based in Connecticut, When he got hired away by DC Comics, I went with him, as did Steve Skates and Steve Ditko and Jim Aparo. I'm probably forgetting someone, but he took most of his freelancers with him. And so suddenly we were all working for DC Comics, which I had considered a kind of foreboding old boys club. I never even bothered to look for work there because, I just assumed I wasn't going to find any. That was probably never true, but it was certainly not true by the time Dick became one of their editors. And after a few months, I got introduced to Julie Schwartz, and that began the really good stuff then.
Well, it's interesting because I think when Dick Giordano went to DC, it seemed that infusion of talent really seemed to revitalize a company that had kind of taken a number 2 position to Marvel. Stan Lee had certainly created a lot of excitement for Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. But let's talk Batman. You brought the character back to his dark roots after the TV series, which was very colorful with the sound effects that would pop up during the punches. So how do you see Batman?
Well, I see him as basically a psychologically damaged man, but not crazy. He is, this terrible trauma. You see your parents gunned down in front of you, and is allowing that to govern his life, partially out of a desire to see that no kid ever has to go through what he went through. Now, he's a real smart guy, and he's Sisyphus. He knows that he's pushing that rock up the hill and he'll never get it to the top. But the effort is worth making in and for itself. Also, I think he gets satisfaction out of this, ego satisfaction. He is smart and he is tough, and he's, in a way, an artist, the way Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe described himself as an artist, doing what nobody else is doing and conceivably what nobody else can do. He is not a psycho. I think in my private biography of Bruce Wayne, he will get to be maybe 40, which is about the outer limit for professional athletes. And he will retire Batman or pass the cape and cowl on to a successor, and then use his brains and money to do good for to do good in other ways. I also think he's going to hunt down Talia wherever she may be in the world, and they will together produce the most intelligent and beautiful child ever in the history of Homo sapiens. If he were real, that would be one possible scenario. Another is his ego won't allow him to retire, and one of those midnights on one of those rooftops, he makes a bad step and he dies. I don't see where there is any other logical, barring debilitating disease, that kind of thing. Those would seem to be the 2 ways he can go. I don't think I would hang out with him if he were real, but I have enough regard for him to be rooting for the retirement Talia scenario.
Kind of like the way Christopher Nolan ended the recent Batman trilogy, where Bruce Wayne's able to step away from the character and move off in virtual anonymity. Easy for me to say.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're about ready to take our first break. When we get back, we'll continue talking with Denny O'Neil.
Hey UNCP, guess what time it is?
Registration! That's right, it's time to register for classes for the upcoming semester.
That sounds complicated.
Nah, it's super easy.
First, log on to BraveWeb and check your time ticket.
Time ticket?
That's the day and time you can begin registering for classes. Upperclassmen go first, followed by juniorclassmen.
Next, make an appointment with your advisor to go over your transcript and schedule, and then you receive your pin.
You mean I need a pin to register for classes?
That's right. Without a pin, you can't get in.
After you meet with your advisor, log into BraveWeb on the day and time of your time ticket and register for your classes.
Some classes may be filled up, so always have a backup plan.
Wowzers, that is super easy.
Don't miss out. Check BraveWeb and meet with your advisor today!
Welcome back to Comic Culture. We are talking with the legendary Denny O'Neil. Now, you created Ra's al Ghul and Talia. You revived the Joker. You brought Two-Face back from basically nowhere. How important are villains to heroes?
So I think the last important lesson I learned was the bad guy is as important as the good guy, because the bad guy kind of activates the good guy. It is silly to write stories about Superman catching pickpockets. Ideally, the bad guy has to present a challenge, a huge challenge, to the good guy, so that when the good guy ultimately triumphs, not only are our values, which he presumably embodies, validated, but we have the satisfaction that is basic to this kind of fiction of seeing the good triumph. And it makes more important than any of that, as a storyteller, I tell more interesting stories if my hero has some real serious problems to solve. That was my problem writing Superman. He's God. I mean, who do you put against him without violating the logic of your own premises? I mean, if this, and this have been established about the character, you can't, I think, legitimately suddenly bring in a new power, though they did that a lot in the early days to solve this plot problem. So, and the bad guys should be interesting in and of themselves. In Milton, who do you think is more interesting, the angels or Satan? I think there's a whole complicated Jungian psychological dynamic about villains. And it's part that we project the rotten parts of ourselves onto them. And I think more than one psychologist has said that's part of the way that kids particularly confront things that make them uneasy about themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's true. I'm sorry. If you go to a convention, when you see cosplayers, the majority of them are dressed up as their favorite villains. I mean, you can't seem to go to a convention without running into a half a dozen Harley Quinns or Jokers.
And as good as Christian Bale was as Batman, what made that second movie work was Heath Ledger's Joker, and absolutely brilliant. I think the best portrayal of a trickster figure in all of literature, not just comic books, but widen the scope as much as you like. And Two-Face was really good in the third one. They were the really interesting part. You may have been rooting for Batman, but you wanted to watch the bad guys.
Right. Sometimes you just want to watch something burn, as Michael Caine said. Now, in your career, you worked with many amazing artists: Jim Aparo, Dick Giordano, Irv Novak, Dennis Cowan, but your work is most closely associated with Neil Adams. How did that collaboration work?
Well, it really wasn't a collaboration. I have not collaborated with, in the normal sense of that word, with anyone but Frank Miller. In that Frank and I, on the stuff we worked on together, sat down at lunch a couple of times a week and talked out the story virtually panel for panel. But back when I was doing Batman and Green Lantern with Neil, the procedure was the writer confers with the editor about the story he's going to tell, goes home and does something that very closely resembles a TV script. And that is given to the artist, and X months later, you have the proof of a comic book in your hand. Neil and I, on the two stories that involved drug use, spent some time talking to drug rehab people in Manhattan. And we saw each other socially all the time. It was a very small world back then, the comic book world. You probably knew everybody, or almost everybody. But we seldom, if ever, talked about story beats or plots. I did my job, he did his.
Would that be the difference between the Marvel method and the DC method, that DC is more of a full script and Marvel is...
Well, these days everybody's full script because it is the most efficient way to do this work. But even working Marvel style, and I did a lot of that in the early years, you talk over the plot with the editor or communicate with the editor somehow. And then when I was working that way, a plot was 3 paragraphs a page maybe. That's given to the artist, and then X weeks later, the editor gives you the artist's work. In the early days, we actually got the boards. I was schlepping valuable artwork on the subway, and you write the script from that. You add the balloons. The writer adds the balloons with blue pencil that won't photograph. Later, Xerox machines were invented, and the process got a lot simpler. But even then, you didn't necessarily have anything to do with, personally, with the artist. I loved working with Jim Aparo, and I worked with him for years before I was ever in the same room with him.
That's really interesting. We're going to have to take another short break. You're watching Comic Culture. We'll be right back.
It's getting late, real late, and you have a lot of work to do. Your assignments are due in the morning, but you'll wait till the last day to do it. Instead of doing your work, you'll head for a party and forget all about your assignments. It's now 5:30 in the morning, and would you have time to finish your assignments after you partied so hard? I don't think so. Don't be a procrastinator. Do your homework.
WNCP Radio The Hawk is the place to go to hear about what's going on campus and for the hottest new music and the best shows. Listening online is super easy. All you have to do is go to uncp.edu, find WNCP Radio at the bottom of the scroll down menu, and click on the live link. With new shows every week, it's always a good time to listen. While you're listening, you should like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter to always know what's happening with WNCP Radio The Hawk.
Welcome back to Comic Culture. You caught us talking between commercial breaks. We're talking with Denny O'Neil. Denny, you are currently on the board of directors for the Hero Initiative.
Yeah.
What is that, and how can folks like me and the audience get involved?
Well, Hero Initiative is an idea that Jim McLaughlin had about 11 years ago. Jim is a comic book journalist and writer. And the dirty secret about the comic book world is there are no safety nets. Most of the work is done freelance or on short-term contract. There are no pension plans, no health benefits. For a long time, no royalties. And so if tragedy can happen to anybody, your wife can have a heart attack or a stroke, or your kids get sick, your house burns down, and if that happens to the average comic book freelancer, they don't have any recourse. So what Heroes Initiative does is raise money primarily, and then the 7 of us who are on the board make ourselves available. And if you are a comic book person and you have real credentials, that is, you've worked in the field for, say, 5 years, and you run into one of these problems, you can apply to us and we will vote, simple majority vote. We seldom turn anybody down. Sometimes we just give a grant, sometimes it's a loan. In the freelance world, there are times when you're temporarily out of work, but you know that come spring or whenever, and that you will get more work. So in that case, if you need mortgage money for this month and next month, we will give it to you as a loan. We kind of do whatever seems appropriate. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the best thing I do. I was one of the lucky ones, but one of the reasons I stopped being a freelancer and took a job as an editor at Marvel was the realization that I have a kid and I'm pushing 40. Surely medical expenses are in my future. And one good heart attack and your savings are wiped out. So one of the things I wanted to do by getting on a staff somewhere was get medical benefits. And I did, but a lot of freelancers are not that lucky. The jobs aren't available when they need them.
I think a lot of people aren't aware. Kurt Swan, who was the definitive Superman artist of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, when he passed away, he wasn't a wealthy man because he was just working month to month. You know, however many pages he was doing, that was what the salary was, and there was no pension there. And people are surprised when they hear about Jack Kirby's family trying to get royalties. And you see images, like I'm wearing a Star Wars shirt, I believe, drawn by John Buscema. I don't know if his family would get any royalties for that.
Well, it has gotten a bit better in that when I started, you got no back-end money, no royalties, no nothing. When you cashed the check, you signed a waiver that gave the company full rights to everything. That is of dubious legality. But it has changed in that the comic books that are now being written, you still sign a work for hire contract, but it does guarantee you some kind of benefit from foreign royalties. If your stuff gets used in the other media, video game, I got a royalty check from DC for something of a minor character I created in the 70s, Maxie Zeus, who was used in a video game. Those things are happening now. Having said that, there are still no health benefits, no retirement benefits. And a lot of the back-end money that people are getting, it is at the behest of the company. They don't have to give it to you.
Right. Now, it's interesting because I've watched a lot of films that have come out recently. Iron Man, the first Iron Man, Jeff Bridges' character was based on a character that you developed, especially the Ironmongerer.
Yeah, that was a real kick because Jeff Bridges is one of my favorite actors. And there he was, Obadiah Stane.
So when you see characters that you've created, certainly in the Batman films, the Iron Man films, when you see those characters on the screen, what's going through your head?
Well, with Obadiah, I barely remembered him. And I didn't know until Mary and I saw a preview of that movie at our local multiplex that my characters had anything to do with it. Marvel did give me something for that. But I was like, look, I mean, I didn't remember Obadiah apart from the name. With the Batman stuff, it's a lot more complicated because I carry a lot of baggage into those screenings. I had problems with all of them up to the Chris Nolan run. And when I did the novelization for Chris's first Batman movie, time and again reading that script, I thought, yeah, he gets it. And why didn't I think of this? But on the last one, I went out of my way not to learn anything about the movie, but I did know that Rosh was coming back and Talia was going to be there, and I did find myself asking questions as I was watching that excellent film, like, is Catwoman going to turn out to be Talia? And I was kind of taken by surprise because Marion Cotillard did a beautiful job, but my image of Talia is tall and stately and regal. And Cotillard is maybe at the opposite end of female attractiveness from what was in my head. Whereas Anne Hathaway is pretty close to what I imagined. So I was delighted with the movie. I can't entirely enjoy it if that professional head is, how are they going to solve this plot problem? Or who's going to play this character? One thing that did take me completely by surprise in the first one was who Ra's al Ghul turned out to be. Mm-hmm. Because actually the guy that wrote that first movie created the character that Liam Neeson seemed to be playing. And it was perfectly logical that that character be in the story. And they gave us a very credible Ra's in the Imposter. So that one, when I got to that point in the script, wow, I wish these guys had been working for me when I was editing this stuff.
Well, I wish we had more time. I'm getting told that we have about 30 seconds left. What do you think your best work is?
The stuff as mature storytelling, the question. I liked a lot of the Batman stuff. I liked Green Lantern, Green Arrow, because it was the first, one of my early opportunities to write about real things, not some made-up being from another planet, but stuff. I was living in a very chancy neighborhood when I wrote that stuff. What was happening outside my window was inspiration for a lot of the stories I was telling. So there was a lot of satisfaction with that. Also, suddenly we were, getting invited places. We had identity. We were getting the respect that writers and artists in other media got. That was unusual back then.
And now it's commonplace. So you were, I would say you were a trailblazer and a pioneer, but we have run out of time. Denny O'Neil, I'd like to thank you so much for appearing on Comic Culture, and I'd like to thank you for watching Comic Culture. We'll see you next time.